Welcome to the VIFF Podcast. This is your chance to get the inside track from the people behind the films you love and the films you are yet to discover. This podcast was recorded on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Recorded during the 43rd edition of the Vancouver International Film Festival, these conversations take us behind the scenes with the creators bringing their work to the big screen. My name is Curtis Woloschuck. I'm the Director of Programming at VIFF, and this week I'm in conversation with Mads Baekkevold, who is the Director of The Chef and the Daruma. Welcome, Mads.
Thank you so much for having me.
For 36 years, Tojo's has been a mainstay in the Vancouver food scene, beloved by critics, foodies, and a plethora of celebrities. A pioneer of Japanese cuisine in the West, Chef Hidekazu Tojo helped bring sushi to the mainstream and is known as the inventor of the California roll. The film delves into his practice, but also his history, both with the city and his home country of Japan. Mads, we're so happy to have you here today to discuss the film with us.
I'm super happy to be here. It's a real honor that you want to talk to me. Love it.
And we're honored to have you.
Wow.
I always like to read someone's bio before they come on in as well. Yeah. And yours says that you're kind of driven by curiosity of people, their stories, their customs, but also food.
Yes.
And wondering for yourself, was there a film in your background that really brought together that relationship between cinema and cuisine that maybe you drew upon for this film or got you excited about the prospect of melding these two fascinations for yourself?
Yeah, totally. There's a small handful of movies that kind of, really mean a lot to me in terms of marrying, as you say, like cuisine with cinema, and some of which serve as inspiration for The Chef and the Daruma. One in particular is definitely my favorite film that deals with food, and it's Juzo Itami's Tampopo. It's a fantastic Japanese film about a struggling ramen restaurant in a small town in Japan, and a trucker passing through with his young companion, kind of frowns at these noodles, and they start setting up and they start teaching the young proprietors how to, make ramen the best possible way. And it's basically like an underdog sports movie in its format. It's got training montages, it's got, drama, it's got, the second act intrigue, and, they're stealing from other ramen restaurants around Japan and yada, yada, yada. It's just like a really life-affirming, beautiful piece of cinema that makes me laugh and cry in equal measure whenever I watch it. Currently watching a lot of that director's other films as well, including Supermarket Woman and stuff like that, and just having an absolute blast. So that's definitely my favorite food movie. And in terms of documentaries, which probably had a bit more of a direct influence on this film. There is one called The Birth of Sake, which is from maybe 10 years ago. And it's just a really humanistic, beautiful portrait of one of the last traditional sake breweries in Japan. Really love that. And then, of course, it's impossible to get away from Jiro Dreams of Sushi. It's kind of if you're going to make a documentary about a chef, let alone a Japanese chef, you kind of need to watch and love that film. So those are 3 food movies that I really like. And also that I encouraged the key members on the team to watch as well.
Well, I will take the moment to, first of all, thank you for the very comprehensive answer. And those are all fine selections. And I think no one would believe you if you said you hadn't seen Jiro Dreams of Sushi. Whether you made this film or another one, you just have to cop to that right away.
Yeah.
But if anyone has the opportunity to see Tampopo with an audience as well,
yes, it
is such a great experience. And I know the Cinematheque here in Vancouver sometimes does a little partnership with a ramen restaurant as well. So you will see a spike in ramen sales in all the adjacent restaurants probably anywhere that Tampopo plays.
Yeah.
In the immediate wake of it.
Yeah, you can probably see like a sort of like a heat map kind of spreading out through the city after every screening of Tampopo. Yeah.
And thank God that people express themselves through the eating of ramen rather than like any sort of violence or things like this.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like the film ends with this like image of like a baby breastfeeding, and I think that's so beautiful because it kind of brings it full circle. It's like, oh yeah, that's what it's all about. We start out very early loving food, and that's what kind of brings it all together.
You mentioned the team that you assembled for the film, or that you gave them these kind of like guiding pieces for this. And full disclosure, the writer of the film, Natalie Morale, is also a part-time or a contract staffer at VIFF as well. So we'll cop to that rate as well while we're making all of our confessions. And but maybe you can talk about your relationship with Natalie and herself as a creative producer on this, and writer, and kind of how the film came to you initially as director, and then maybe how you worked with Natalie and others in terms of the shaping of it.
Yeah, those two are kind of like intertwined, so I can kind of like quickly talk on how it came to me, because that led to bringing Natalie on board. A couple of years ago, when a Michelin guide came to Vancouver, this is a longer story, but I'll just cut it short. I'm also a commercial director, and I made like a little promo on commission from Destination Vancouver to promote the Vancouver food scene. Got talking to Tojo, obviously. He was featured in it, because, you can't make a promo on Vancouver food without mentioning Tojo. And immediately I was just like, wow, this guy is like an endlessly intriguing character, just like an excellent raconteur, just like a showman. And already, like, after interview, I was like, oh, I want to cut that interview into like a 20-minute like short film, and yada, yada, yada. And then, of course, that kind of like germed the idea and blossomed from there into me pitching the Chef and the Daruma. And that was the impetus for bringing Natalie on board, because almost even before it was accepted as a pitch, Telus, Wallop Film, who produced the film, me, wanted to make sure that we had authentic voices, both behind the camera as well as in front of it. And someone like Natalie, who is, in addition to being just like an immensely talented, intelligent person and an excellent filmmaker in her own right, is also a fourth generation Yonsei Japanese Canadian. And we felt like, because we wanted the film to touch on not just Tojo's story, but the story of Japanese Canadian, what it means to be Japanese Canadian, it felt very important to have Natalie there, in addition to a plethora of other people, to serve as kind of like a guiding light and to give it that like authenticity and that like lived experience and that like insight. So I hadn't met Natalie before. She was someone that I believe it was Wallop who had a connection to her and brought her on board and kind of put us, in touch with each other. And, we hit it off really quick through our like shared love of culture and movies, and there's a lot of overlap in our tastes and I think in our sense of humor and in our sort of like outlook on life. And yeah, I consider Natalie a friend now, obviously, not just like a collaborative partner on this film. So yeah, it's just one of the other perks of filmmaking, is to put you in touch with these like beautiful, amazing, smart, thoughtful, creative, talented people that you hope to have in your life for years to come.
Well, I find it interesting you talk about like that first encounter with Tojo that kind of sparked, this idea of seeing him as the stuff or the subject of a film, through the showmanship and such. But of course, this film takes us beyond, that sort of pageantry, if you will, and is much more intimate in terms of his own history as an individual, as an artist. And what was that process like for yourself and perhaps others involved with the film of being like, it's more exploration than promotion?
Yeah, Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you say that, because like it would have been very easy to make, this kind of like glossy, superficial, check out the crazy story of the guy who's said to have invented the California roll, like this like razzle dazzle kind of like big picture, loud kind of thing. Instead, we wanted to make something that was more intimate and thoughtful and reflective and philosophical. But in a sense, it turned out that it was inevitable that we would make something like that when we were filming Tojo, because he is so thoughtful and reflective and philosophical, as is the sphere of people around him. So, me and Natalie, we prepared for the film for like half a year, just in conversation with Tojo. We went to his home. We went to barbecues. We went to his restaurant several times, getting some perks there, obviously. And so when we got to know him, I think, he's a man in his 70s, and he's reflective. There's been a couple of, I think, kind of like abortive attempts to maybe like document his story before in a major way. So he was very like hungry and eager to finally get it out there, like who he is as a person. Yet at the same time, kind of like trusting me and trusting the team with, I'm not going to dictate, you're not like allowed to cover this, you're not allowed to cover that. Like he surrendered himself to us entirely creatively, but it was definitely like very clear that this is going to be like a very reflective, philosophical, insightful piece, because that's just who the guy is. Like you put him in front of the camera and that's what you're going to get. So that kind of worked out.
And I think one of the really important pieces in the film as well is that, he's not the sole figure in front of the camera. And as you draw from other members of the greater community, I guess maybe what I found a certain level of surprise with as well is just the candor of some folks, talking about there is a certain, if not elitism, at least exclusivity about, Tojo's as well. So it represents this one piece, but not everyone gets to experience it. And in those conversations with him, did you, I don't know if that's the right word, but like prepare him for like maybe some of the criticism that might emerge in the film? Or do you think he was very cognizant of that as well, kind of going into this process?
No, we didn't necessarily like prepare him for that. Like, I think it's a very brief but necessary moment of criticism about how, food that, could tend to be for everyone is now, kind of locked behind the paywall a little bit, as it were.
Right.
We didn't really prepare him for that, because he wasn't, there when we filmed those interviews. It's not like he needed to like oversee and kind of dictate when we were filming with other people. So we did have a screening with him before the film was finished, and I would be lying if I said I wasn't extremely nervous when it came to that part where it is like a little bit of a criticism, and I was like, okay, is he gonna react to this? And not only did he not like have like a negative reaction to it, him and his team were kind of like, I feel like we need more context for that bit. Like I feel like, because it was originally shorter, and they felt like, well, maybe it needs more elaboration on this. And that was a great note. And we kind of like, surprisingly enough, after that piece of criticism became like a longer part of the film.
Interesting.
So yeah, he was totally open to touching on the, not thornier subjects, but maybe not like the, as you say, like completely like hagiographic kind of subject way of looking at it.
Well, you mentioned, I guess, the length of the film there, and or length of scenes as well.
Yeah.
And the film does have a very kind of distinct structure to it as well, like with some visual framing devices within it, some motifs that are utilized throughout. How did that come about for yourself and maybe cinematographer or others in terms of like determining exactly how you wanted to kind of apportion the film and give it form?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the form of the film is obviously sort of based around this like ritual of Daruma, the Daruma of the title. And I'm sure a lot of people don't know what a Daruma is, just based on the name, but they've definitely seen one if they've ever been to a Japanese restaurant or a Japanese store or whatever. So if I can touch on that briefly, like just to kind of like explain the framing device, I guess. It's like they are these like red paper mache dolls or heads, basically. They're round with a flat base. And they're painted in the image of like this stern-looking Buddhist monk, Daruma, who is like a monk from folklore. And they come without eyes, and you are meant to paint in one of the eyes, set a goal or a wish or a dream or whatever, you know, like something that you need to focus on, something you want to happen. Like in Japan, politicians will always fill out a Daruma at the start of like election season to make sure they get elected or wherever, you know. And you put that Daruma somewhere you can always see it, to remind yourself of said goal or dream or wish or whatever. And then once that goal or dream or wish comes true, you fill in the other eye, basically saying thank you to Daruma. And Tojo had this like absolute unit of a Daruma in his restaurant, which I saw when we were filming B-roll for the Michelin piece. And I started talking about it because due to me, like, you know, living in Asia for close to a decade, I also like to have like a Daruma going as just like a little like motivational thing. Like, oh yeah, remind yourself, you know, that's your next, you know, little milestone, little goal. And so we got to talking about that, and that was definitely like part of the other like germ of the idea for the film, of like, what if we were to structure the film around the Daruma ritual? Because Tojo is clearly a guy who, he set a goal for himself, he focused on it, he kept it visible, both mentally and literally, and then he achieved it, and then there's another goal, and there's always another goal, and so in terms of what you're alluding to, there are these like, you know, kind of like quote unquote like dream sequences, or they're in like a metaphysical space or what have you. You could probably get really pretentious about it. Where we see Tojo walking around this like Daruma temple, that is a Daruma temple in Osaka. And it also, at certain pieces, gives you these like instructions at certain points on how this works. And it kind of, like, a life story is always going to be very sprawling and messy, right? And so it was like a real boon to be able to, okay, well, even if this is getting messy and out of hand, let's return to the Daruma ritual and be like, okay, where are you at right now? Do you have a goal you're focusing on? Like, what is your current goal? And so that kind of serves as the spine for the film, both in terms of like a chapter kind of way, and as like a visual narrative device.
I'm curious to know, because you mentioned, you know, having lived in Asia for almost a decade, and before we started recording, you shared that, you know, you're coming up on your third anniversary living in Vancouver. So
yeah,
I think in the film there's a physical journey that occurs as he returns to Japan. There's also this kind of temporal journey that occurs going back into Vancouver's kind of history. And some time capsule type moments and revisiting of darker chapters of Vancouver history as well.
Yeah.
And was there an element of that exploration, both geographic and kind of historical, that appealed to you as someone who's new to this space to embark on?
Yeah. You know, it's a very delicate matter, right? Because I am a, you know, Western guy making a movie about a Japanese person. And what I found about the parallels between me and Tojo's journeys so fascinating, part of it was that at just about the same age, I moved to Asia at the same age that he moved to Canada. So there's a similarity there, right? But at the same time, my experience was so vastly different from his. So it wasn't like, oh, we're so similar. It was more like, oh, we basically did almost the same thing, but our experiences could not have been more contrasting to each other. Like I had a very easy way go of it, of moving to Asia was not, some big deal for me. Whereas for Tojo, he faced unspeakable racism, and he arrived in a Canada that was, still and still is, soiled with, these like horrible atrocities that had been done to marginalized communities. So to me, it was kind of like that contrast between the two things of like, oh yeah, no, for me, they rolled out the red carpet, and here's a guy who's had to struggle every second of his life here for like just the basic, inch of acceptance. So it was more that contrast that drew me to the story, I'd say.
This being your first feature length film, and being made in this in Vancouver as well, did it feel, was this kind of your indoctrination into the film community here as well? Would you suggest?
Yeah, I would say that now that it's like coming out at VIFF, it's feeling more and more like that. Like all the events that are happening and all the, hullabaloo around the film, like the media.
The glamorous photo shoots.
The glamorous photo shoots amongst them, yeah. No, I did dig that. And of course the incredible podcasts and all that hullabaloo is really fun to be part of. And yeah, it definitely feels like a little bit of like a... What I like about Vancouver is kind of like film scene, film community, is that it's like, it's different from like Amsterdam, for example. To me, has this like very like every man for himself. I used to live and work in Amsterdam. Has this like very like every man for himself, kind of like gung-ho, kind of like cutthroat mentality about it. Whereas Vancouver, I feel like the film community here has more of like a rising tide lifts all ships kind of thing, where people are like, oh, you're succeeding. Oh, that means, great. That means, more people might make movies in Vancouver. And, oh, I want to be in your movie. I want to help out. Oh, yeah, run and gun. And there's just, I'm not going to pretend that's maybe not like a little bit of like rosy-eyed, rose-colored glasses or whatever. But it definitely does seem like the Vancouver film community is a bit more like accepting and a bit more like getting excited on behalf of other people, as opposed to, I don't care that something good happened to you, it should have happened to me instead, which I'm maybe like a bit more used to from like the mentality in Europe. Yeah.
Had you been looking for a feature film to make? Had you been like maybe working towards making a feature film? Or do you think this is more of a byproduct of like circumstance and the inspiration?
Yeah, a word we kept using on the shoot was serendipitous. Yeah. Everything felt very serendipitous. Stuff just kind of had a way of working itself out. And the way the film came to be was also very serendipitous, I would say. And yeah, it does feel a little bit like it kind of fell into my lap a little bit, It was this, like, it was a very like lateral journey of like, okay, the Michelin shoot, the conversations with Tojo, and then the pitch, and then, oh yeah, we are off to the races. And a year later, here's the movie, premiering at VIFF. I never really like saw myself necessarily as like I've always loved documentary. But like to make a documentary film was not necessarily what I was the most focused on. There are documentaries that I still want to make and that I'm still, developing. But in terms of like the movies that I was pursuing, I was and still am very focused on like scripted horror content is kind of like what I really dig. And now it's kind of like, well, why not both,
Well, we anticipate as soon as this podcast drops that that we knocking down your door. Wondering what's next, obviously.
Yeah, no, I like to think so, yeah.
All right, well, before we conclude proceedings, I'm
Yes.
going to reach into this popcorn box of random questions and see what the Wheel of Destiny determines for you.
Love it.
Huh. What's a film you think should have a sequel?
Wow. What's a film I think should have a sequel?
And what might that look like?
Damn, that is that's a great question. That's a really good question. Give me a couple of moments here to think about that one. Little Shop of Horrors. I think Frank Oz's Little Shop of Horrors should have a sequel. It's one of my top 5 favorite films of all time. It's a seminal piece of cinema from my childhood. I watched it at the Rio pretty recently, and it still slaps. It's an incredible movie. A perfect movie in every single way. Nothing makes me laugh harder than John Candy's character as a radio host in that film. It's absolute perfection. And if there was a sequel, there was a scrapped dark ending to that film, where instead of beating Audrey 2 propagates and takes over the world, basically. And they shot it. They shot this like beautiful kaiju style, massive Audrey 2's wreaking havoc on the world, basically, like bursting through, the World Trade Center and biting through the San Francisco bridge and yada, yada, yada. And like, if there was a sequel, that should be the starting point. It should be like, okay, they didn't beat Audrey 2. Audrey 2 is now this like Godzilla-sized, this Audrey 2 is now this like Godzilla-sized behemoth. And now we have to deal with this like infestation of giant Audrey 2s. And I mean, it goes without saying that this should be all puppets still, of course.
Practical effects.
Yeah, I mean.
I'm sold.
Yeah?
Yeah. Put me down in your crowdfunding efforts.
Let's make it happen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
start a Kickstarter.
You heard us, Hollywood. The petition is out there. Thank you so much, Mads, for joining us today. This was really fantastic, and the film screens at the 43rd edition of the Vancouver International Film Festival, and will assuredly find its way to other screens after that.
Fingers crossed.
You have been listening to the VIFF Podcast. Thanks to our community broadcast partner, TELUS Story Hive, for their support. If you're enjoying the show, please rate and review the podcast, and be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Visit VIFF.org to learn more about the Vancouver International Film Festival and see what's on at the VIFF Center year-round.